Welcome everyone to the third episode of Creators Arena, brought to you by Creators of Product. Today we have with us Kshitij Bhardwaj. Kshitij is currently head of consumer platform at Gojek. He has a lot of experience in the Indian startup arena. He started his career as a product designer. Early days he did spend time with Flipkart. Then he was helping housing during their peak days, then spent time at Touch Talent, PepperTap, and has been working at Gojek right now. At Gojek, Kshitij has been responsible for multiple things. He was leading a large chunk of liquidity problems while building GoPay, which is the payment arm of Gojek. And recently, he is leading product teams at consumer platform, which focuses at solving consumer related problems across all Gojek services. Today he'll be sharing about design thinking as a product manager and a product designer at startups. He has seen creation very closely, and he'll be sharing some of those thoughts today. So without taking much time, I'll hand it over to Kshitij. Thank you very much for giving your time, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Divakar, for the introduction and welcome everyone for coming for this talk. Uh, just to add to the introduction that Divakar gave, I did my uh, study or my bachelor's in design. So I started out as a designer, and like Divakar mentioned, I worked at Flipkart and housing, uh, and then I switched to product management. Uh, Let me, I'll actually cover that part, that why did I made that switch in the slides itself. So let's start. So design thinking, right? Two words, design and thinking. And if we look at these separately, uh, let's just look at first what is design. People usually think of design as maybe some art form, or maybe some a fashion design or some interior design. Yes, all of those are also design, but then design is even broader. Design, it's again it's a very unique English word which is used as a noun, as a verb, as an adjective, as an adverb, and in different contexts it means different things. So what actually is design? So design is actually a structured, as a process, as a verb, it is a structured creative process of creating value by often discovering new realities to innovate, which results in design as a noun. So design as a noun is actually an artifact which enables stakeholders to extract value. And those stakeholders, it could be your users, it could be the business, it could be your teams that work on that artifact. So that's basically what design is as a verb and as a noun. Another way to look at a design is it's a balance, it's a fine balance between function, aesthetics, and usability of an artifact, which creates or which aims to create value. Uh, if you look at words like function and usability, they might seem very straightforward, but when it comes to aesthetics, people usually again look at it only from physical beauty aspects, but then beauty goes much beyond that. Beauty is basically it's a combination of qualities that pleases intellect, which pleases power, the power of mind to to look at things. So it's not just limited to, say, tangible objects or even digital products. It's also goes to things like even bunch of lines of codes. So again, coming back to design, design is basically a fine balance between function, aesthetics, and usability. Design is not art, because art is mostly biased towards aesthetics without being much focused on any functionality aspects of it, or even the usability aspect of it. The only motivation behind an art is to soothe that 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 beauty aspect of basically the need of the intellect to appreciate beauty. So who's a designer then? A designer is basically, who goes through all of these processes, who creates this balance between these three different parameters of an artifact to create value. In other ways to look at it, in the context of a business or a product, a designer interrelates between user problem space, between business opportunities and technology available. And you might remember, that Venn diagram, the famous or infamous Venn diagram that people have seen, that three circles intersecting, and people say, okay, here is UX or here is product. It's not about that Venn diagram, but it's more about how a designer interrelates these three different problem spaces. Now one may ask then, as a profession, as a professional, is it just the designer that we see in the organizations? uh, are they only the designer? Not really. A designer, it's more of a it's something that, so anyone can be a designer, right? Anyone can do all of these things. That's where I also had this thought back when I was studying design, that designer is creating or uh, is finding that fine balance between these three different areas. It doesn't have to be like uh, just focus on only the end, uh, only the, let's say, usability aspect of the end solution. It's going from the very beginning, understanding that problem space, working on even business models, and looking at the available technologies to create a final artifact through which you can derive value. So that's where I decided to make a switch as well from a designer to a product manager, because a product manager essentially is also doing this. It's just that because the process of designing is it's actually in a corporate setup, or in a company setup, when you're working on something, it's fairly elaborate. And for one person to do every aspect of every step or every aspect of that process, it's just too much, and it's not efficient given there are some deadlines. So that's where these different roles got carved out. Let's say that's why we have product managers, we have designers, we have software engineers. All of them are specializing in something, but then anyone can be a designer. It's just about investing time into these spaces, into these areas, and then thinking about those things from that perspective. So I chose to be a product manager and solve or think about creating value at a much more abstract level than solving problem at the final interface level. So that's where I made the switch. That's why I say that product managers are also designers as software engineers as well. So moving on to the next term of this word, design thinking. It's basically use of one's mind actively to form connected ideas, and those connected ideas become your thoughts, your thinking. And this is done through reasoning. That's what basically thinking is. But then there are different types of thinking. There's inductive thinking, there's deductive thinking, there's abductive thinking. Inductive thinking is basically you might remember this chapter from mathematics, where there was this something called induction, proof by induction. So it's basically you infer A when you see A and B occurring over and over again at the same time. For example, let's say there's a premise which says that all crows are black, and as more and more crows come up and all of them are black, you would say that, okay, this thinking is becoming more and more it's getting validated again and again. But as soon as a white crow comes into the picture, this becomes invalid. So that is inductive thinking. Deductive is very standard. It's something that everyone does on a day-to-day basis. We uh, say that, okay, if something is happening, it's happening as a consequence of something else. Abductive thinking is more about creating hypothesis with some backing, maybe of some data or some observation, and saying that something is happening as an explanation of something else. So that's abductive thinking. But then where does design thinking comes into the picture? So design thinking it's basically the process of it's basically applying the design process iteratively to formulate concepts and validate them. But concepts are a bit different from ideas. Ideas are basically, an individual, or it's a bit of uh, an independent thought, which may or may not have, a direct value. But then when you, reason through multiple ideas, when you connect when you connect them, when you interconnect them, you create concepts. Uh, and concepts are through which, they can be further evolved into creating an artifact or a value. So to summarize all of this, design thinking can be summarized, in the simple format. There is a starting point uh, to which you have to go to in order to, start thinking from that design thinking point of view. So design thinking is a tool. It's nothing else. It's just a way of thinking uh, in a situation, in a context, to uh, come up with uh, you know a radical way of thinking, or a new way of, or a radical solution, or a radical outcome, instead of, a very linear thought process. So uh, it's basically, you start at some point, and arriving at that point itself is a different process. But then let's say that you already have that starting point, you start diverging from that point because you have a lot of horizontal knowledge. That's where, being a jack of all trades comes into the picture. When you know a lot of things, you look at, from that starting point, you start looking at things from very you start looking at things differently, and you start seeing connections in, different ways. So coming to this starting point is, very important. There are different ways to come at it. There are user researches that people do, or people ask, 5 whys to come to, understand the core problem or the core starting point. So once you have that, from there you start diverging, and then you start, once you're satisfied that you have a lot of, you know uh, different ideas, you have a lot of directions in which you can move. That's when you apply the filter. The filter here is basically your constraints that you have from technology side, from business side. And this applies not just, in the digital products, it applies in every context, even in day-to-day lives. And to be honest, everyone already is a design thinker. It's just that we limit our thinking because we have some assumptions or some pre-notions. And on a rare occasions, yeah, we do apply, and that's where we say that, okay, someone is creative and they have, suddenly come up with something. And everyone has had those creative moments. But then how do we have those moments more and more? So the way to think like that is this: you diverge, you apply filters. Depending on the context, what those filters can change. In case of building digital products or services, you would apply your technology and business filters, and then you converge to your solutions, and that convergence leads to those concepts. So yeah, that's what design thinking is. So yeah, another way to look at it is that PMF here is basically your product market fit in the context of digital products. So let's say if you have not achieved your product market fit when you're working on a new product, you repeat this cycle. You diverge, you filter, and then you converge. So in order to diverge, you have to gain a lot of context, empathize with users to, to get to understand uh, their problems or their motivations or their desires. You apply your tech and business constraints, and then you will build your concepts. What does a profile of a design thinker look like? Of course, there can be many more other things. It's just that, this is what I usually, whenever I'm thinking of something, I would have these things in the back of my mind. Uh, a design thinker usually thinks from first principles perspective. First principles basically help you in coming up with the starting point. First principles is basically, it's the physics way of thinking, or even from mathematics point of view, there are something called axioms. Axioms are basically, the hypothesis that cannot be further deduced. I think Divakar has written a very good post on first principles. You should also check it out. So a design thinker thinks from first principles point of view, has an empathy for users, is optimistic about the situations or the problem space, and a design thinker knows, or has the belief that they can come up with a good solution. Experimentalism, it's in the DNA of design process, that you repetitively or iteratively go through a cycle with your objectives, and unless you have uh, seen an objectively measurable outcome, you continue repeating it. Jack of many trades helps in the sense that you you have a broader horizon in terms of thinking. Of course, having a detailed knowledge of things helps, but then we also have to weigh in, the amount of time that we have uh, in order to work or to implement something. So that's where, being a jack of many trades helps in, coming up with different directions or starting points when you to think of uh, different directions and different ideas from that starting point. Collaborative attitude, because yes, one person can do a lot of things, but it's about the time uh, that one has to implement something. So that's where, in the companies, you would find a designer, you'll find a product manager, QAs, software engineers, because it makes the process much more efficient and faster. But in a true sense, a designer can or should be doing all of this. Yeah, so first principle, it's basically the basic assumption that cannot be further reduced, and this helps because you find that starting point, and from that point you start going in different directions. Another way to come up with that starting point is, of course, your user research, or asking 5 whys and getting closer to that point. All of this also kind of relates to an idea development, or the stages of an idea development. There are different steps or stages for an idea to develop into a concept which helps in creating uh, or getting value out of it, or extracting value out of it. First step is the invention part, then you have innovation and entrepreneurship. Invention is basically connecting dots to solve a defined or undefined problems. This is where you also have your eureka moments. You are you have a lot of researchers and a lot of people who are looking at. Usually, people also define their objectives very well in advance. That's where those defined problems are there. But then you also have eureka moments. So, but this is happening without thinking about the application or how one would extract value out of it. So that's where invention happens. So maybe think of someone invented a DC motor, and then people started creating applications out of it. So that invention was DC motor. Innovation is basically iteratively inventing till some application value is created, which can then be commercialized. So once you have that DC motor, you can create an application out of it, and you can possibly commercialize it. That's what innovation is. Entrepreneurship is basically creating and maintaining an environment in which innovation can thrive. under under the constraints. So at each of these stage, you can apply design thinking, uh, because it's again it goes back to that whole fundamental thing that you always have a problem to solve, and to look at to solve that problem, you always have to go back to the core problem. You start thinking about different ways in which it can be solved. You apply filters, and then you converge to a solution. So creating this environment is again a problem. Uh, there are some examples that I mean, there are actually design thinking is more common than we think, but there are some examples that maybe I can share here. So one of the examples is there was recently, I think back in 2018, uh, there was a lot of problem that the South Australian government was facing, where uh, the families who were going through difficult times, uh, the government wanted to help them to get out of those conditions or those situations, but then blindly giving them some packages, some assistance was not working out. So what the government did, they tried to understand the root cause, or the starting point from where they can start diverging. And that starting point was that families, they had this self pride, or they didn't want like free assistance, or even if they were, then it wasn't completely altering the way they were living. So that's when they learned that people are more open to getting uh, lessons or understanding from other families who have come out of from those difficult times, because they have gone through it and they are willing to share the knowledge. uh, it would help them directly, because it would become more trustworthy. So they created this family by family program, where families who came out of those difficult times, they were signing up to share their lessons or their learnings to the families who had to come out of those situations. So that's how a South Australian government solved this specific problem. Tesla cars, everyone knows, the biggest problem that Tesla was facing was the battery cost. And uh, Elon Musk has famously quoted that the way they were looking at solving this battery problem was, they looked at the constituents of a battery, and then they looked at the London commodity exchange and looked at the price of individual constituents, and then they got into the invention phase, where how they could use those constituents to create a new type of battery. So that's how they invented a new battery at a much cheaper cost, probably at around 80% cheaper than what was prevalent at that time. Another example from Gojek I can quote is the instant bank withdrawals for our driver partners. So our driver partners were having a lot of troubles in terms of withdrawing the money that they have earned on the platform. Uh, and this is something which almost all the ride hailing companies also face with the situation. They would they would often allow drivers to withdraw money, maybe after a day or after a week. And we also had a similar situation at Gojek, but then there were a lot of support tickets that were created by drivers, where they were asking what is the current status of my withdrawal request, when would my money be available to be withdrawn, and this was quite high. So we looked at this problem in in further detail, and we found out that it's much easier if we make it an instant process for drivers, because it doesn't affect our business a lot, but it helps the driver partners a lot, because they use this operating cash to be available to be operating the next day, also provide for their families. And if there is a delay in this uh, cash withdrawal, it affects their family a lot. So even if there's a 1 day of withdrawal, they probably have to go and take some petty cash loan from someone in order to operate, to get their fuel and stuff. So we we completely relooked at it. We came up with a solution where a driver can just enter their mobile phone number at an ATM machine, get an OTP, enter that OTP in the machine, and then withdraw the cash instantly. And this happened in collaboration with other banks. Those banks also did not have this technology prevalent. So we, got in touch with them. We further iterated over this technology and the solutions, and we came up with this best approach from a driver's perspective, where they can go to any ATM machine, enter their phone number, and withdraw the cash for the day. So yep, that's pretty much it from my side. Should we look at the questions now?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kshitij. Very relevant and very relatable. The only thing that I would want to add to is that as you keep going ahead in your career, keep doing more things, the more these things start becoming more obvious. While at the beginning of the career, people are worried about complicated things and finding complex solutions to all problems. But eventually, as you keep solving more problems, because as you continue building more products, you realize that if you go first principles, if you collaborate rightly on things, the chances of getting to solutions is better, and there's definitely not a silver bullet. So thanks a lot. Let's jump on to the questions. So the first question is from Shruti. So everybody, please put your questions in the chat section. Kshitij, you can open the chat section and you can see the question.
Should I
Shruti, you
read?
can ask the question. I think the one who has
Yeah.
written down the question can read.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, so hi Kshitij. So this is basically something that I've always had as a back thought when I was working while creating products. It's a very niche skill to have. It's not something that you can sort of develop out of doing rigorous exercises on Excel training modules and sort of get a hang of it. But still, there might be some exercises or some course that I can or anyone who's into product can do that you recommend that can sort of keep refreshing their design thinkingness part, because everyday mundane tasks make you almost a robot in things. And I believe that the whole principle of design thinking is not something that everyone is blessed to sort of have. So is there something that you would recommend that I should, as a product person, do as an exercise, and not books, but like something that will keep me updated or keep me up to date with how to go about doing this framework wise thinking.
Sure, Shruti. I'll also welcome, others to pitch in to answer this question. From my perspective, or from my, experience, what I've seen is that uh, it's again not about, again, it's not actually a very niche thing. Like I was saying, that at at some point in everyone's life, we have been creative and we come up with some creative solutions. It's just that, because our thought process has been more analytical and logical, and we apply more of deductive thinking on a day-to-day basis, we don't take a step back. So this is about taking a step back. This is about going back to to understanding the core of the problem, or the starting point. And how do you come to that starting point is, there are different ways, like, user research, applying first principles, having empathy for users. So with that, you can, come to that or, 5 whys. You can come to that starting point. How you can practice it? Again, you can probably look at your favorite product that you use. You can look at, why do you use that product? I mean, we start using it, but then we don't, ask this question ourselves, that why are we using that product? We just have a liking, and then we continue with using that. But then, when we take a pause, think about, why am I using that product? Ask those 5 whys. you will come to that starting point, and then maybe you can have a radical solution to that problem itself. So it's about practicing it. It will come from practice itself. There is no course as such. It's just a different way of thinking.
Okay, because in my experience, I've usually been able to offload it per se to the design team, thinking they'll probably come up with a better solution. But I think it's something that should be invested in for every product person.
So if you look at it from design team's perspective, they also look for a PRD or a starting point from them, right? So they are trusting a product manager to define that starting point for them, and then they start diverging in different directions from that starting point. So the same can be done by a product manager to coming up to that starting point.
Okay.
Product managers already do that in a deductive process where they reach out to a lot of stakeholders. They understand their business problems, tech problems, and then write those they synthesize that information to come up to that information. But then this is again, it happens very linearly. And because we don't take a pause and look at that problem very differently, we just come up with a very I would say not so, for the lack of a better word, yes, it's obvious. So it comes up with an obvious solution, but then design thinking also leads to a lot of other obvious solutions which were not very obvious when
to begin with.
Yes, to begin with, because we were not thinking like that. But then it became apparent. It looked like, okay, yeah, it was so obvious. Why did not I think about it?
Yeah, thank you.
I hope I was able to answer.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
I think the second question is from Matrei.
Yeah. Hi, Kshitij. So majorly I wanted to ask about is like how we read about design thinking, what is the design thinking process, and how we have like how if we like mainly focus on the pain points or the problem statement more, we can find out better solution and all those things, and different UX methods. There are like tons of UX methods which are there. So how to apply UX methods while working in a design thinking process? Because when you tend to solve some problem, you actually like jump in sometimes to the kind of application you are thinking about, the solution basically. So how to apply those methods in the design thinking process and how actually it works?
So sorry, I could not understand the question completely. When you say UX methods, what are you referring to?
Like the persona building, the user journeys, and all those things.
So persona building itself is something where you can apply design thinking. Personas, it's again a representation of a class of behavior of users who are using your product or potential users who are going to use your product. So how do you classify or how do you categorize those behavior? Again, there could be different ways of categorizations, right? So to come up with that framework of categorizing those behavior is where you can apply design thinking process. Design thinking is basically it's a tool. It's not it's not something which can do things in standalone. I mean, it requires some input and it gives you an output, but then you apply it on those inputs.
Okay. Like if you can share some example, a short example, that would help.
Example about personas?
Maybe depending upon the design thinking process.
So I mentioned 3 examples in the slides about design thinking in government policy making, design thinking in technology by coming up with cheaper batteries, and design thinking in creating a withdrawal process for drivers. Do you need, further explanations of those examples?
So what I understood from those problems was that they have defined a problem statement, like the Tesla cars. They have defined the problem statements that it's a battery issue, but how they are coming up to the solution, what methods they are thinking about, or
Sure.
how they are thinking on this?
So, okay, let's again take this Tesla example. So, coming up with the problem itself, it was very clear and apparent for electric cars, because that different how much different components are costing. It's just about listing. It's a very deductive process. You just list down all the components of an electric car. You write the price next to that component, and then you say that, okay, this is what is contributing the most in the price. And also the perception of your potential customers that, okay, this is why it's very expensive. So you have the problem. How do you solve it? You that's how Tesla started thinking about it. They looked at the price of batteries. It was around $600 per kilowatt hour. And then they looked at the components that were part of that battery, mainly cobalt, nickel, aluminum, all those matters, some casing for the battery. And then they looked at the pricing of each of those components on the commodity exchanges, and individual uh, cost of those constituents was very less. And then the challenge was to invent a battery using the same uh, constituents, possibly aligning all of those components into an assembly which can again give the same kind of output. And that was again taken from possibly existing researches that had already happened about different uh, ways of creating battery using those constituents. So you basically you break down that problem into a few starting points, and then you recollect everything.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is from Chandrasekhar.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So currently I'm about to graduate from my design degree,
Mm-hmm.
and I had an economics and business background and experience in a managerial role, but I wanted to learn more about your career transition from design to product management, and I wanted to learn about what are the skills you felt that gave you an advantage in your role right now, and what did you feel you needed to learn more, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So going in, what was the most unexpected thing you realized that was the difference between design and product management?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I would say the thing that gave me the most advantage was the design education that I had uh, at my college. This was something which I didn't know even before going to that program, but when I did, I understood how a set of problems can be solved in a structured way, and coming up with different ideas and building new concepts to solving those problems. So that gave me the advantage to problem solving itself. But then, like I mentioned in the profile of a designer, it's also about being the jack of many trades. And this helps because a PM on a day-to-day basis interacts a lot with different types of stakeholders, from legal to marketing, to operations, to business, tech. So how do you understand that language? How do you understand the constraints and the constraints that each of those functions are facing? So reading about more of what other functions contribute, or how other functions contribute in a product life cycle, it would help you to have a better conversations with them, or to have to be a better product manager, which is able to take an idea from a very uh, starting point to a successful product.
Okay, thanks for that.
Sure. The next question is from Venkatesh.
Yeah. Hi, Kshitij.
Hey.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
I work as a PM at Invention. Now, I found that the relationship between designer and a product manager is quite interesting. Both of us think about design and interaction, and in some cases, both of us actually design. Now, if you see the JD, there is a very neater line in the sand, but in reality, the line is much more blurred.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I want to know that as a designer, what do designers really want from product managers?
Mm-hmm.
And your point of view, because you have been designer and you have been product manager too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know about your point of view from both the perspective as a designer as well as a PM.
Sure. So uh, I briefly mentioned it before as well. Uh, as uh, a designer is looking for, a starting point from where they can diverge, uh, come up with, different type of ideas, and then converge to a couple of concepts. A designer is not looking, for a prescription by someone that, okay, this is how a solution should be built. I mean, that's why they were hired, right? To come up with different concepts. A PM, I would say a good balance between, an interaction between a PM and a designer should be where a PM gives a starting point, but I would say a good PM also collaborates with a lot of stakeholders to come up with that starting point. So a designer, it should not be like a hands-off thing where, designer is waiting for a PM to define that starting point in the PRD, and that's it. A good designer would always be, interested in how uh, how how are we defining a problem itself, and that's where, designers usually work with UX researchers and, a lot of uh, uh, market research agencies to come up with those problems. So a PM, I would say, is not about defining the PRDs. PM's job is mainly about facilitating interactions between these different stakeholders who are helping build a solution. But then, depending on, the organization that you're working with, you step up and you fill in some gaps that are there in your teams. So that's how a PM is usually, contributing in a team. So I would say that's where the balance is. A PM should not be, creating wireframes or, uh, uh, UIs. I mean, of course you can, but then you should not be like pressurizing or forcing a designer that, okay, this is it. Maybe you should just, touch it up and create visuals around it. That's not I would say that's not the right balance. But again, it differs from organizations to organization, because some organizations would expect a PM to do all of those things, but then I would say that's not the PM role. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. This is super useful.
So the next question is from Ankit. Hello, hey Ankit. I think he's not here. Should we move?
Ankit, we can't hear you if you're speaking. You might be on mute. The question is that design thinking process is not same as creating designs or becoming a UX person. It's mainly to think from a user perspective and taking a third-party view for a problem. I think he's making a statement. He's not asking a
Yeah,
question
it's
here.
not a question.
I see his mic is off, but Ankit, we can't hear you.
Hey, I was away. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
you are right. I was replying to one of the person who was specifically asking about the design process. So I was just clarifying. It was not a question.
Sure, sure. Next question is from Shashank. It's a follow-up question. Shashank, if you're there, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, hi. So the follow-up question to what Chandrasekhar asked. Firstly, congrats on transitioning from design to PMs. So I think statistically, of the PMs, only 1%, I guess, are from design background. So one part of the 1%. So congrats on that. And I'm also a designer myself. So it'll be great if you can share some of your inside stories of, how was the application process? How was the interview process? How many did you apply to? Like, some more personal uh,
Mhm.
instances. Yeah.
Sure. So thanks for congratulating me, but I made that switch back in 2014 itself. Uh, so I would say I've always, so even when I was studying design, it was never, about a product manager or a designer. To me, a product manager is a designer. I'm still a designer, but it's just, the way organizations are set up, like I was saying to make the process of creating products more efficient and faster. That's why we break it down, into different roles. Your product manager starting, working on the high level problem statement, defining them for the team. Then team is working on it through designers and researchers and software engineers, and then you ship it out to some marketing teams. Uh, for me, I've always looked at a product or creating a product end to end. From the very beginning itself, I've always, even when I in the college, when we were, so most my curriculum entailed not just theoretical theoretical knowledge. It was more about practical projects that we were working on. It was very less theory. We actually did not even have exams. I mean, it's very, I mean, we did, but then not in the way that typically it's being taken by other type of bachelor programs. So it has always been about practicals, and I've always looked at solving a problem end to end, which involved me playing multiple roles. And because I did that, I was very comfortable with doing or adding value in that process at different roles. And because like I said, being a jack of many trades is important as a product manager. It helps you a lot. So I learned coding on my own. I'm a self-learned full stack developer. I develop I code on my side projects, and I create backend services. I create mobile applications. I write web front end applications. So I invested my time in understanding different parts of that product lifecycle, and how can I contribute value at each of those stages, and not just limit myself to only one aspect. So that's how uh, you know I gained that experience. And then in a typical interview process, the organizations would usually ask about one of the parts of that cycle. And because if you have already practiced those things, maybe in your side projects, personal projects, or in your prior experience, it's very comfortable and very easy for you to answer to those questions. So yeah, that's to even further summarize it, I keep on working a lot of side projects where I get to learn different things, and I just apply those things whenever I'm talking to someone, to my teams, or maybe giving an interview.
Okay, Kshitij. What I've observed is some of these companies have a hard requirement of an MBA, and some of them even have an IM or a ISB requirement, right? So,
Yeah.
should you even bother applying to them? Is it even possible to crack it?
I mean, of course you can apply, but then don't have. I mean, I won't say have high hopes, but this is something which is not in your control, right?
Yeah.
If they've already said that, okay, they want so and so person, you cannot change their mind, and they have those policies. So maybe not even bother about those, and choose probably other organizations, or maybe try to reach out the the PMs in those organizations, and have a word if that is really a requirement that they have. Because sometimes not a lot of people put a lot of effort in job descriptions. They probably copy paste as well from somewhere. So it's having, I would say, reaching out. If you're really keen about joining a certain organization, maybe you can reach out to people in those organizations and clarify if that is the case. But there are so many companies and so many products and organizations that you can work with. So yeah, you can always go somewhere else.
Great, thanks.
The next question is from Aditi.
No,
Hi.
next is from Narayan Rao.
Oh yeah, it's actually from Narayan. Sorry. Hey Narayan, do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Kshitij. This is Narayan. My question is about when a PM and a UX designer are working on a solution. Sometimes it may so happen that they arrive at a different solution. It had happened once with me. And how do you actually navigate that conflict on how a solution should work. Can design thinking help in this process?
Sure.
I'll give a little bit of background so that it's more clear.
Yeah.
So designer had this, thinking that product should be in a specific direction and we should be thinking about it in a specific direction. And I was coming from the fact that it's not validated yet from the customer side that this is what we want to do for them. So yeah.
Okay. So I would say it depends. It's a bit of an organizational problem as well, and not just between a between a conflict between say a PM or a UX designer. Uh, a PM should help define the constraints that a designer is working with, right? If you are not if you're not constraining it, if you're not setting the right expectation that these are the constraints that you're working with, a designer is designer would tend to go in different directions and come up with a solution. So I would say you know help a designer by defining those starting points and defining the constraints for them, and then they would work within those constraints. If they are not then working within those constraints, then it's an organizational problem. Maybe then you should have a discussion with the design leadership that, okay, is this how we are supposed to interact, or something like that. But then it's more about defining things for not just even for design, it also goes for engineers, right? You would, if you're not defining the right expectations, the right acceptance criteria for your stories, then an engineer would create things based on their assumption. If you're making others assume something, if you're making them assume something, then I would say it's a PM's fault, because the PM did not define things, did not set the right expectation, did not set the right expectation.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think yeah, that probably has some role in why something happened. Thank you.
Sure. So we have come to the last question, Aditi.
Hi. So I actually wanted to ask that when you're probably applying the design thinking process to solve a problem, you don't always have the resources to finally develop it and test the same thing and then see that if the solution was optimal or feasible. So how can we probably know at an earlier stage if you're on the right track?
How can you know if you're on the right track? So the only way where you can be a lot more confident if you're on the right track is when your customers or your users are giving feedback about your product. And the best way to get an unbiased feedback is if they are using your product, your prototype, in the context in which you want them to use it, right? That is the best way. And how do you do that? Then there are different ways in which people have worked on these things, like creating those low fidelity prototypes, some paper prototypes. So that's where it comes closer to what you're trying to validate. That is how you validate a problem when you don't have a lot of resources to probably build a high fidelity prototype. But it cannot be theoretically asked, and you cannot just go to your users and say that, okay, would you use it? People would have wild answers to those. Most of them would say yes, because probably they do not even understand the context in which it is supposed to be used. But then it sounds cool or good, they would say yes. But in actual setting, they might not use it.
All right. So do we usually have the scope for these trial and errors where you can?
Yes. So that's where you create multiple concepts. Remember, that starting point, you diverge, you apply filters, you create some concepts, you create those concepts, maybe as a paper prototype, and then you float those paper prototypes in the right setting to that user, and ask them, okay, that you're supposed to achieve this end goal, and here is the tool for you. Please use this tool to achieve that goal, and then just observe them, what are they doing.
All right. Great. I think that solves it. Thank you.
Cool. I think
So
that's all.
that's all, folks, and thank you very much, Kshitij, for your time and also for the answers. Uh, See, we are on this remote call, so we can't clap in real, but at least I request everybody to unmute and give a round of applause for Kshitij.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me here. And thank you for listening so patiently.
That's all. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend and
Yes.
enjoy.
Have a good
Stay
weekend, everyone.
safe.
Goodbye.